Hi, I'm Femi Oke, and you're in the stream. Today, thousands of U.S. prisoners are starting a nationwide strike for better conditions.
I'm Malika Bilal. We'll examine what's compelled inmates to protest and what they can achieve. Join the conversation through YouTube and Twitter.
Over the next 20 days, inmates in prisons, jails and immigration detention centres will hold peaceful sit-ins, hunger strikes and labour stoppages to push for reform of a system that they say abuses and exploits them.
That's right. This is the second national prisoner strike in 2 years. Organisers hope to encourage even more inmates than the 24,000 who took part in that record-breaking protest. This year's demonstrations are led by Jailhouse Lawyers Speak, an incarcerated group of reform advocates. They're supported by several other groups seeking changes to the prison system. The strike was called in response to the death of 7 inmates in a riot at a South Carolina state prison in April. It was the worst disturbance in a U.S. prison in 25 years.
Organisers of the strikes have several demands. Take a look at this clip featuring a former prisoner and organiser called Cole Dorsey. He outlines some of the most pressing issues for inmates.
Prisoners have called for immediate improvement to prisons and prison conditions, having access to vote, having access to the law library and law resources, rehabilitation access and services. Pell Grants should be reinstated. There's been less and less services, whether they be college degrees and particularly rehab services.
For more on the strike, we are joined from Columbia, South Carolina by Crystal Roundtree. She is a representative and organizer for Jailhouse Lawyers Speak, which is leading the protest.
We're also joined by Chandra Bazelko. She's a formerly incarcerated writer whose prison diaries was honored with several awards. She joins us from Orange, Connecticut.
Marilyn Ralston is a member of the California Coalition for Women Prisoners. She's also a program coordinator for Project Rebound at California State University, as well as a Just Leadership USA alum. She joins us from Fullerton, California. Hello, everybody. Malika, where should we start?
On my computer. Hello. On my computer with a member of our community who explains why we're here today and why this strike got started. Kimberly here says what led to the strike today were the horrible conditions that prisoners were forced to live in. These are conditions that mirror the conditions that enslaved people were forced to live in, and I think anyone being oppressed would fight back. She goes on to say, it was this incident at Lee Correctional Institution that we mentioned at the top of the show in South Carolina, and the horrible deaths of 7 inmates and injuring of others that really galvanized the situation and sparked these men and women into action. Crystal, pick that apart for our international audience. Explain to us what happened that led to why we're here today.
Thank you for having me once again. You know, prison conditions, you know, the strike is essentially a demand for the recognition of the human rights of prisoners and the state of the prisons in this country currently. There was a riot that took place, you know, which you alluded to a bit earlier at Lee Correctional Institution in April of this year in South Carolina, where 7 inmates were in fact killed and 17 others were injured in very under preventable circumstances, certainly. As a result of that, prisoners across the nation essentially want to bring worldwide mass attention and awareness, again, to the conditions that they are being subjected to the dangerous and violent and non-productive conditions of the prison system right now. Prisoners are essentially being warehoused without any sort of incentive. No rehabilitation, no treatment programs. And so we have this situation here that I describe as a crisis situation right now in the prison system. The prisoners they have a host of demands that they are requesting as a result of this, you know, as a part of their demands for this national prison strike. Some of those things definitely include an immediate improvement to the conditions that they are subjected to on a daily basis.
Sure.
An immediate end to prison slavery, which is legitimately happening and going on right here today in America's prison system.
Crystal, as you're speaking, I hear Romarin going, It's resonating because you have been on the other side. You have been inside, Romarin. At what point would you have been surprised that, okay, there's a nationwide strike? Or is there no surprise whatsoever that some prisoners are saying, we're not working?
I'm not surprised at all. You know, what happened at Lee Correctional Facility was a tipping point. And so across prisons in California, you know, we're overcrowded. There's a lack of programming. Conditions are bad. There needs to be policy improvements. And so when you're warehousing folks in these deplorable conditions, something that happens even in another state can give you the courage and the energy to step up and represent what you feel is human dignity for you. Within California prisons, we have almost 160,000 folks in cages. We lead the national rate in suicide in deplorable conditions. We've been warehousing folks through prison expansion since the 80s. So it's really time for Governor Brown, who's the governor here in California, and governors across this nation to start treating incarcerated people with dignity and respect. 95% of all incarcerated folks return to their communities. That return should be a return where there's jobs, where there's access to resources, where there's higher education, and it can start inside the prisons, and it should, because Benny, that's rehabilitation.
Chandra, go ahead.
Can I jump in here?
Please do. Go ahead,
I think that
Chandra.
there are two separate issues, though, involved in this strike. One, the top demand is changing prison conditions, which I wholeheartedly agree with. The second one is about wages and abolishing prison labor. I have written extensively. My experience with prison labor was actually positive. I know that's not a typical situation, but there are people who undergo significant emotional and rehabilitative changes through their prison jobs. And I know when I was in, if someone told me we're striking and then as of tomorrow we might not have jobs, I don't know if I would have survived.
Do you want to explain what that job was and how it helped you get through your time in prison, Chandra?
It was a kitchen job, so it was manual labor. Setting up the food, serving it to the other women in the facility. It actually taught me a significant number of leadership skills. And as I've explained to a lot of other people, it got me out of a 5x10 cell. That's not a natural state for a human being. That's maybe sitting in a box or a cage, maybe for a zoo animal or a new litter of kittens. It's acceptable, but not for human beings. So even though I was being brought into a kitchen where I had to work very hard for 75 cents a day, I was still in an open area where I could move around like a human being. I was also doing things like cooking a soup or serving a soup that somewhere in the world someone else was doing the same thing. Whereas sitting in my cell, that's just rotting and festering. That's not human activity.
And that's, I think, some of...
Go ahead, Romarin.
I think that's one of the reasons why it's been hard to get some of these reforms and policies changed, because the labor that folks do inside, they are grateful for. Some of those skills do translate to jobs on the outside. However, you know, those jobs inside can be a whole lot better. Wages can be improved. The conditions in which people work definitely can be improved. And it's that kind of attitude of gratitude that many of us have going into the prison system, because we're ashamed and we're embarrassed of the things that we've done to get there, that kind of leads us to this really grateful attitude around getting out of the cell and having these kind of dining room jobs and digging ditches for 8 cents an hour or 17 cents an hour. But I think the bigger picture here is that it doesn't allow us to save. It doesn't allow us to support our families on the outside. Prison wages don't allow you to be productive members of your family when you're incarcerated. And that income is removed from your family when you're locked up.
Right, Romarin, and I think that's why there are several people online who are likening it to slavery. This is August 21, J.B. Ware, who says the U.S. prison labor system is based upon the 13th Amendment, which justifies slavery as punishment for a crime. The system claims a lot of labor is voluntary, but if prisoners refuse to work, they are inherently punished by being trapped in the confines of their cells or solitary. Now, and on that note, we also got a video comment from someone who's working directly on this issue. This is Azadeh. She's a legal and advocacy director for Project South, which is focused on this issue, and this is what she told the stream.
Immigrants at the facility are basically coerced to participate in this work program by using threats of placing them in solitary confinement if they don't participate, actually placing them in solitary, or depriving them of life necessities. So one of our plaintiffs, one of our named plaintiffs, Shoaib Ahmed, he actually has since been deported to Bangladesh, but he was detained at the Stewart Detention Center. And he said that because he hadn't received his payment, which I should mention, really meager wages between $1 to $4 a day. He hadn't received his payment, and so he said no work tomorrow, and so for that he was placed in solitary for several days, and he continues to suffer from the impact of that.
So, Marilyn, I could see you nodding your head there. I want to note for our international audience, Azadeh there in that video comment is talking about immigration detention center, but it shows really how broad this issue is because it's across jails, prisons, immigration detention centers, and other places. So that idea of this being modern day slavery, is that something that you can understand why people are saying?
Oh, it is, because failure to program results in you losing time. It may result in you losing privileges. It will result in you not earning any day-for-day milestone credits. So working in the prison is a voluntary thing, but then it's not voluntary because you're punished if you don't work. But again, you don't receive the sufficient amount of pay for that work. The labor that you put in is nowhere near equal. And just because there's a loophole in the United States Constitution, doesn't mean that people should be treated inhumanely, without dignity and respect. And that's what the 13th Amendment does.
Crystal, I can see you just about to jump in here. Let me just say the 13th Amendment abolished slavery, except if you are in prison. So slavery still exists in the United States if you're a prisoner. Crystal, go ahead.
Absolutely. Slavery still is very much alive and well in this country today. Legitimized by the 13th Amendment, as several people have touched on already. But I just want to back up for a moment and note that in some states, such as South Carolina, majority of the people incarcerated there are literally being warehoused, and I mean they're not working. So there are other ways that people have decided to engage in the strike, such as sit-ins, boycotts, not spending any money for the next 20 days. All of this is designed to send a message to the system. And so, in fact, yes, there are many prisoners in this country who are working under slave-like conditions, and we know this clearly as slavery. But I did just want to mention for the record that there are a number of people in this country, prisoners who are incarcerated in detention centers, immigration detention centers, and other locations that actually do not have a job. They are literally being warehoused, but they will be participating in the strike as well.
Sure. I have to play this for our audience. This comes from the Incarcerated Workers Organising Committee. This is Daryl Aitkins. He sums up what it is like to work as a prisoner and the wages you get. Have a listen to Daryl.
I started out as a line server, serving food for breakfast and dinner. Then I became a dishwasher and just all maintenance of the kitchen. They didn't pay much. They paid 13 cents an hour. Basically, I made $20 a month, and they took 55% of that out for restitution.
So joining us on the line from Staten Prison in Alabama, we have Swift Justice. He is a co-founder of Unheard Voices. That's a non-profit advocating prison reform. He's a key organizer of this strike, talking to us from inside on his phone. Swift Justice, how's the strike going so far?
Well, hopefully it's going pretty good now. Where I'm at, we don't require these guys to actually do any work stoppage or anything like that. But what we're focusing on is in the major institutions such as Holman and West Jefferson and St. Clair and even Tutwiler is where we're hoping that everything is going. As far as being able to reach out to the guys over there, it's been really silent today. We're assuming that they have them on lockdown at these camps at this time.
So what actually happens when prisoners go on strike?
Well, basically what we're doing is we are doing a peaceful protest, and all we require is that these comrades not to report to their jobs, with their institutional jobs, such as the brother on the recording was talking about in the kitchens, any ACI, or what we call industrial jobs that Alabama uses. And we sit down and what we have requested now too is also to boycott the stores and the canteens, as well as any packages from different companies such as Union Supply and so on. We are asking also that that inmates boycott any spending of any visitation food that is served on the visitation yards that also goes back to the state of Alabama.
Mm-hmm. You know, Swift Justice, for our audience that isn't aware, I want to share this tweet we got from someone August 21 who says, remember, when you talk about the prison strike, talk about what prisoners are striking for. And they included a list of demands. Among them, at the very top of the list is improving conditions of prisons. And the second is an immediate end to prison slavery. The list goes on. There's about 9, 10 things on that list. What is number one for you? Why are you striking?
Well, the number one thing for me, and I think it's very important that every comrade that is boycotting or striking, always remember our main goal is always to abolish the 13th Amendment of the Federal Constitution and our state constitution as well. Here in Alabama, it would be in Section 1, Article 32 of the Alabama 1901 Constitution that gives a loophole for the 13th Amendment to give the state leeway to own slaves. And every other thing that we are demanding in our demands, such as in Alabama, one, for instance, changes dealing with the life without parole criteria and other issues such as bringing in incentive good time for inmates to actually have control over their own fate and change and their release date, and the parole guidelines, such as the parole's new guidelines as far as when an inmate is eligible in Alabama to return back to society on parole. A lot of our demands, as far as what's broke down, pretty much mirror each other. I know in South Carolina, the brothers over there are asking for voting rights, which is something that we here in Alabama have somewhat one foot in the door in doing so. At this time, Alabama inmates that have non-moral interpreted crimes are allowed to vote inside the institutions or inside the jails, and once they return inside the society without receiving a pardon from the state. But I think it's important that we remember that our main focus and goal is to ask for the removal and the abolishment of the 13th Amendment.
Okay.
So thank you, Swift, for mentioning prison abolition, because that should be our primary goal, is to abolish prisons. And as you said to that list, there's so many demands. All 10 of them are very important. For me, I would definitely want to say that number one, just improving the conditions, but we need to abolish prisons. And since we still have prisons that exist in our society today, we need to have those prisons with conditions that support the health, wholeness, and wellness of people. And that's access to programming, good mental health, good medical care, dental care, and access to higher education. But another really important point on the list of demands is around sentencing reforms. In the state of California, there's over 120 sentencing reforms on the books that oftentimes lead people to getting these really high sentences of 60, 80, 100 years to life. And that's death by incarceration. And thank you again for mentioning the life without the possibility of parole. The California Coalition for Women Prisoners held a drop LWOP rally at the steps of the Capitol in Sacramento, California, asking Governor Brown to commute all 5,000 sentences to life with a possibility. They've been very good here in California with commuting sentences, but they could do better. But then I just want to bring women into the conversation, because incarcerated women are different than incarcerated men. And if folks are going to exist in these cages, we need to start thinking about ways that gender play a part in that. And for trans and non-gender conforming people, there needs to just be more access to services and programs that specifically speak to individuals' identity.
So, Marilyn, I spoke to a couple of correctional departments, or our team did, because we wanted to have their voice in this conversation. They didn't turn up in the conversation, but they did send a statement. South Carolina Department of Correction, this is what they told us when we told them that we were doing this show. They said that the agency is aware of a nationwide prison strike starting on August 21st, 2018. We are currently monitoring this situation for any activity within the prisons. The agency will take the necessary actions to ensure the prisons are safe. Malika.
That said, we always get comments like this, Chandra, and we got this live on YouTube, so I want to share it with you. Brent Armstrong says, no one cares. When you break the laws in America, you forfeit freedom. What do you say to people like Brent?
I would say several things. Well, first, I would say you don't necessarily have to forfeit freedom if you have transgressed or broken the law. But there's a larger issue, and I'm glad that this person who tweeted, said, or commented on YouTube said that, is that we have an entirely too punitive society. We have made it, if you look at what's happening in the recent immigration situation where children are being separated from parents, in the United States, the attitude is that if you have broken a law, if you have sinned, if you have transgressed, then anything goes. So remember, when we're talking about just losing freedom, I think this person might be envisioning short sentences or things like that. What I believe the other guests and I are talking about is a loss of life. Marilyn mentioned people who are sentenced to death by incarceration. Also, the risks in prison labor of dying are actually kind of high. There's no OSHA protection. There's no workplace safety precautions that are implemented for inmates because we are not considered under the law employees, which is another aspect of this that's totally dehumanizing and devalues everything that we've done.
Let me give you.
You know, I think it's very funny that, because I've actually heard that many times, people talking about that. And I have one point that I would love to point out to society, because that is an issue that I really have a problem with. So Brent or whoever it was that said that, I would like to address that by saying this: there's no law whatsoever that refrains me or keeps me from moving next door to you. So it is very much in your interest to worry about what goes on in these places, such as these prisons in the state of, or in the United States of America, because when I get out, who I am that day will reflect what effort you put in as a taxpaying citizen and the agencies that you pay your taxes to every single day.
Swift.
Into doing and ensuring their job.
Swift justice, that's a really interesting point. Marilyn, I want you to do a humble brag of all of the studies and the qualifications you got while you were incarcerated. Go for it.
Well, I was able to get some firefighter training, and that included first responder certification. I earned several degrees inside the prison.
Several degrees? Too many to mention? How many degrees did you earn? How many?
2 AA degrees, a bachelor's degree, a master's, and a
I'm not smart enough to have a conversation with you.
From Christian Leadership University in Christian counseling.
All right. So this what we're seeing right in front of us. This is rehabilitation. This conversation is not over yet. If you're watching on TV, we would like you to go to YouTube, where we will continue the conversation on YouTube. If you don't know where that address is, go to @AJStream on Twitter. We will tweet you the address for YouTube so that you can pick up the conversation. We have Crystal, we have Chandra, who has been incarcerated. We have Marilyn, who has been incarcerated. We have Swift Justice, who is currently in prison right now. Malika.
We will pick up on YouTube with this comment. This is Brian on Twitter, who says, I defer to strikers to define success, but I think they've already had lots of it with generating awareness around conditions. We'll talk about what success means.
To be continued. We will see you online on YouTube. Thanks for watching. Take care.
Welcome back, YouTube viewers. We're going to carry on just a little longer on the U.S. National Prison Strike. Keep your comments coming through the YouTube chat, and I'll do my best to bring in as many as I can. I want to start here with this tweet, actually, from Brian, who talks about what it will look like to define success for this current prison strike. He says, I think they've already had lots of it with generating awareness around conditions and seizing the narrative on prisoner protests. Demands are absolutely achievable. They're pretty basic things you'd expect in a more fair and humane system. And of course, I want all of our guests' views on that, but I'm going to go to you first, Swift. How would you define success?
Man, that right there, it can be summed up in many, many different things. But, you know, my success and the way that I would see success is just to see that we see the abolishment of slavery, because and I stay on that. I stay stuck on that, and I think it's important that America listen to what we're saying as far as the abolishment of slavery. We're not asking for the abolishment of prisons, because I live in prison. I've been in all the maximum security prisons in the state of Alabama. I have been involved in violence my entire life inside of the prison. And there are guys and women that I'm sure that probably never should be ever back into society again, I'm sure. I hate to have to say that, but I have to look at the things that I say in a non-biased standpoint. But in every aspect of what we're doing, if we abolish slavery and do away with the slavery clause that gives the government the leeway to do what they're doing as far as placing legislation upon our legislators to pass these laws just to fill up these prisons, just to put bodies in here so that they can make money, then a lot of the problems are going to go away, such as the poor medical, the overcrowding, the understaffing. That's going to go away. There's going to be no need for the what they call nowadays mass incarceration. There's going to be no need to put massive people in there. They're going to start focusing on the actual rehabilitating of individuals who need true rehabilitation. And I have a problem with how people so loosely use the word rehabilitation. Because if people really take a good understanding of what the definition of rehabilitate means, tell me the first individual who is rehabilitated, such as this queen that's on talking about that she was a firefighter in California. When she got out, to my understanding, she cannot work as a firefighter. So how is that being rehabilitated and placed as the citizen that she was before she ever came to prison, when you can't trust her to be a firefighter as a so-called free citizen, but can trust her as a firefighter as a slave? I don't understand it. I can't comprehend that. So I'm asking that society come up with a new thinking pattern of what we're dealing with here today.
Marilyn?
We asked that same question. You make a good point. And so we're working on legislation around that will allow for certain occupational licensing to be afforded to folks who have criminal records, because a lot of licenses now bar you from being able to obtain those licenses, or a lot of occupations bar you from being able to obtain a license if you have a criminal record. So we're working on legislation here in California to do away with that, and so that folks have more access to getting into those jobs that they're actually trained for inside the prison.
Sure.
But
And Romaline, I'm just looking at pictures here. I hear you, Shonda. I'm just going to show our audience what we're talking about here. There are firefighters in California right now who are inmates. And if you look here, and they're right here firefighting, you would not know that they're inmates. No. They're in exactly the same spaces that other firefighters are, and they get paid $1 an hour for their firefighting. But when they get out, with those skills that they already have, they cannot then go and be professional firefighters. But I do believe in Arizona that you can do that. They do have a program in Arizona where you can work as a firefighter as an inmate, and then when you leave, you can join the firefighting profession. if you have the qualifications. So that's like a baby step.
That reason is exactly why our audience is saying this is a revolving door. We got this comment live on YouTube. This is Rain, who says, once you're a felon, your sentence never truly ends, even after you get out. You can't get a job, and that's why prison has a revolving door. So on that note, I want to pass you something, Crystal, because we got a video comment from another former inmate. This is Kevin Steele, and this is what he talks about, keeping on that same point. Have a listen.
I blame capitalism for what happened to the brothers in Lee Correctional Facility in South Carolina, because the prison was overpopulated, and the only reason why the prison is overpopulated because of the money. They stuff enough bodies into the prisons where they get more money for each individual. And if capitalism wasn't at the root, that would have never happened. We are looking to shut down these prison systems, these industrial systems that's inside the prison systems. We're looking to get better health care. We're looking to do different tactics that will lead to a better living. But ultimately, we're looking for human rights for brothers and sisters that's incarcerated.
Crystal?
I think, the brother who just made that comment was absolutely on point. Capitalism is certainly the fuel behind the state of the prison systems that we see today, the mass number of people being incarcerated and warehoused, as we've mentioned. This strike is really, it's really about human rights. And of course, the 13th Amendment and the slavery aspect is a key component of it. But I do just want to remind people that there's a whole list of 10 demands that encompass other aspects, long-term strategies
and
to address
Crystal,
some of these
that
things.
really leapt out at me. There was some of the demands were about immediate improvements in living conditions in prison. For instance, if you're never given parole, what point is there for you to even bother to behave well to your fellow inmates? If you have grievances and no one listens to your grievances, what's the point? So there's that, so very practical information and demands, but also some larger, big picture demands. How about the justice system? How about racial justice? How about not incarcerating so many African Americans, so many minorities? All of that is in the demands as well. I know, Chandra, that you've been trying to get in. Go ahead. What did you want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback on Swift's excellent point here, which is the stunning hypocrisy of this system. Companies like Victoria's Secret and Starbucks and other people can contract for prison labor because they can pay very low wages to the men and women who work inside these facilities. Yet when they are released, as Romarilyn pointed out, 95% of men and women in prison will be released one day. They can't get a job with that same company. So my big point is I would like, ideally, if I could bring out success from this strike, it would be for these companies to know that if we're good enough to work for them while we're inside, we're also good enough to work for them when we're outside. And that's a big disconnect that I see. It's connected to the capitalism points that Crystal made and Kevin did. But I think that if we could come out with that understanding, I would define that as success.
Let me just play
I agree.
this.
And that's part of the prison industrial complex.
Yeah.
But if we get back to the equal pay for equal wages, and there was a joint venture between these corporations and these prisons, and folks were earning the same amount of money as folks on the outside, we would have that. I think we would have access to employment on the outside, with just the biggest barrier to recidivism.
Guests and people watching on YouTube, Swift Justice, hold tight. I just want to play this to you. I want you to be able to hear this. There was a national prison strike in 2016. One of the organisers, Benu Hannibal Rason, spoke to Al Jazeera's documentary series, Fault Lines. This is Josh Rushing talking to him about the punishment he got for organising that prison strike. Have a listen.
Officials placed Benu in solitary for failure to obey orders and for using a cell phone to talk to the media. He was supposed to be there for 15 days.
They snatched me up August the 19th of last year, right before the nationwide work strike on September 9th.
That was 8 months ago. Today, Benu is still in solitary.
We try to find out what happened to Benu, who's still in Alabama in a place called Bessemer in a segregation unit. He got in trouble for talking to the media. Swift, you're on the phone to us. People are going to be wondering, how are you on the phone in prison?
Well, I tell you, I have to repeat what my brother, Kinetic Justice, said one time. We just utilize the tools. This is a warfare that we live every day, and we are struggling and fighting for our life on the frontier. So we just utilize every tool that we can utilize. And, you know, over the years, we have become smarter and started utilizing them against them. And ADOC, along with other agencies throughout the state, they try to turn around and use that against us and say that many of the things that go on inside the prisons is over cell phones. But it is a problem, but it's not a problem to us, and it's not something that we are putting violence towards. I mean, it becomes a problem because of the exposure that we are actually using now.
Swift Justice, we appreciate you being on the show. Marilyn and Chandra and Crystal, we're about to run out of YouTube time, so we have to wrap up elegantly so we don't all just fall off the edge of the internet. Here's Malika with the wrap up.
I will give the last question, or the last comment rather, to someone on YouTube. This is Capo, who writes in giving us context for this conversation, saying currently incarceration is just a punishment. It's far from rehabilitation. The money spent on holding someone for a year is more than a normal wage.
Oh, this conversation isn't over yet, but we bring it to you on day one of the National Prison Strike of 2018. Thank you, guests, for helping us have this conversation. We will see you online. Thank you.